Well, hello. Thank you all for joining us today and for finding a window of time to take part in this experience of growth and insight into Naropa University. Today, we were going to have a chance to hear from some Naropa leaders, expand our understanding through a sample class, and join a broad array of breakout rooms after this session. But before we do, let's just take a little bit of a deep dive into our community before we learn a little bit more. Founded in 1974 by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, Naropa is the first accredited university to bring contemplative education to the West. We'll dive in a little bit more about what contemplative education really means to us, but really at Naropa, mindfulness practice is at the center of everything that we do. And we truly believe that changing the world, that starts from within. Now, whether you're going for a master's, your bachelor's, a certificate program, or anything in between, academic life at Naropa is complemented by self-reflection and learning to be mindful. Just one aspect of contemplative practice that is close to our hearts is the Naropa bow. Now, the Naropa bow represents something unique to every community member, but here's really what it means to me. In general, it's a moment of mindfulness to transition from one activity to the next. And contemplative work at Naropa isn't one where you're told what a practice is going to mean for you or the value you're going to find in it, but more empowering you to explore the value for you. So if you do feel so inclined, feel free to take part in this Naropa bow with me. I'm going to verbalize my process of it. And if not, as far as everything goes at Naropa, if you don't find value or you don't feel comfortable taking part in a practice, feel free to sit back and observe. And we'll also close up our sample class today with another Naropa bow. So this will be a little bit of a crash course. So as far as the Naropa bow goes, I always start by closing my eyes, getting a nice flat base back connected to the earth. And I straighten out my spine, try to get a flat line back connected to the earth. And through my practice, I take countless deep breaths. And for me, it's a 3-step process. I start first with a mental check-in. Take a little note on if I'm feeling stressed, if I'm feeling overwhelmed, and if I am feeling some of those emotions, where are those really coming from? Then I have a second step that is more of a physical check-in. If I'm feeling stressed or overwhelmed, is that manifesting anywhere for me in my body? Typically, that manifests a little bit of pressure in my forehead. I feel some tension in my lower back if I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. So I just try to check in and see about those feelings. And then finally, I go to more of a transitionary practice, taking steps 1 and 2 into consideration. How can I really use that to transition into the next step of my day? When I'm feeling centered, when I'm feeling ready, a simple bow at the waist. Well, thank you for joining us. And maybe your first Naropa bow is complete, hopefully the first Naropa bow of many. Now, before we spoke about Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, our founder and leader of yesteryear, and now it brings me immense joy to introduce our current leader, President Charles Leaf. President since 2012, his impact on Naropa began long before that. President Leaf participated in some of the earliest discussions that really worked to create Naropa University. He's been an active member of the community since our creation in 1974, acting as a lawyer and as the founding member of the Board of Trustees. Following a 28-year career as a social entrepreneur, developing affordable housing, healthcare clinics, early childhood education center, and businesses, all in the service of homelessness, low-income people, and communities, Chuck returned to Boulder and to Naropa. He and his wife, the Buddhist teacher and writer Judy Leaf, who led Naropa from 1980 to 1985, are the parents of 2 daughters, both of whom are Naropa graduates. Thank you for spending some time with us today, President Leaf.
Thanks, Peter. It's wonderful to welcome all of you, and I want to thank Jason Appt for agreeing to teach this sample class. You'll all be lucky to spend some time with Jason in the virtual classroom. And so I'm glad you're going to have a chance to do that. We're thinking a lot, because we think about the calendar, that Naropa is approaching 50 years. In 2024, we will be celebrating our 50th anniversary of what was really a pretty audacious experiment. The notion that in 1974, there might be a place in the world of higher education for a university which from the outset integrated mindfulness and compassion practices in order to support students to become leaders in a world that was then and still is in need of healing. And so this experiment has gone on for almost 5 decades now. Our missions and our values arose from the founding faculty and from the earliest students, but they're actually living documents and living qualities, and they've been informed by the generations of faculty, staff, and students who followed those early pioneers. More to the point, I think they've been validated by the remarkable work that Naropa graduates are doing in the world, because that really is the sort of fundamental way that we can measure what our impact is. And that work takes many, many forms. We have graduates who are therapists, teachers, activists, notable practitioners of the creative arts, performance, writing, poetry, fine arts, music, dance. We have graduates who are entrepreneurs, and we have graduates who are civic leaders. So a whole range of ways in which Naropa students show up in the world. I think it's always interesting just to think through some concrete examples of what Naropa graduates are doing, and just to share a couple that came to my mind when I was thinking about greeting you this morning. One is Sarah Vakasi. Sarah Vakasi has a Master of Divinity degree from Naropa. She's an eco-chaplain who moved from Boulder to Appalachia, and she's supporting communities which are protecting the land, moving from the coal economy that's so detrimental to the well-being of these communities, and basically supporting them, both their spiritual health, their ecological health, and their community connection. Another graduate is Kirsten Wilson, who has a Master of Fine Arts in Performance, and who founded the Modus Theater Company, which, if you ever have an opportunity to see a Modus Theater presentation, I strongly recommend it. Her work is built around telling the stories of people who are in marginalized places in our society, and particularly doing a lot of work telling the stories of dreamers, of undocumented young people who have found themselves in the United States and who are living in a world that is filled with both possibility and also of great risk. And so Modus Theater's work has been to share those stories with a really broad community. There's alums like Dennis Kerr. Dennis has a BA in yoga studies. He came to Naropa as a veteran. He was 12 years in the Army. And he was a musician in the Army, which some people assume maybe was one of the less risky jobs, but he served much of that time in Iraq, and tells the story of how, as a musician, he played taps for over 1,000 funerals in the Army, and what that meant to him and how that impacted him, and how finding Naropa and getting an opportunity to study here in a community in which mindfulness and compassion practices were offered from the day he arrived was so important to him. And Dennis left here as a certified yoga instructor, a field where Black teachers like Dennis are still greatly underrepresented. And he's having incredible impact on the areas he's living in now in Reno, Nevada. Or finally, Jade Begay. Jade Begay has a graduate degree in environmental studies. She's a Native American activist from New Mexico, and she was appointed last year by President Biden to the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. So just an example of 4 of thousands of Naropa alums who have left this place in Colorado, and now, because of our move into more and more opportunities for virtual learning, are settled in other places around the world, and who are taking the skills, the wisdom, the practice realizations that were honed and developed during whatever period of time, 1 year to 4 years or longer, that people spend at Naropa, and are using it in ways which make them of great service to the world, and offering their own energy, vision, and wisdom to the communities that they live in and to the broader society. So I want to welcome all of you who are exploring Naropa, maybe for the first time, maybe you've attended a few of these Experience Naropa events. This is really the beginning of a conversation that we welcome having with you. And it's not just the admissions counselors who are absolutely the front line of our Naropa connection to you all as interested prospective students, but also I can speak on behalf of my staff and faculty colleagues that we're all more than welcome to engage you with whatever questions that you have, to sort of share our own experiences of what it's like to be at a place like this, and to figure out a way that we can welcome you here at whatever time makes sense in the rhythm of your own lives, and to include you as part of, our 5 generations of the Naropa community, five decades of the Naropa community. So I want to welcome all of you. Thank you to Peter for opening this up, and I hope you have a really wonderful experience this afternoon. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for those words, President Lee. Now, we shared before that Naropa first started in 1974, and by the mid-1980s, Naropa became a fully accredited institution of higher learning, and we've been on the forefront of contemplative education since. Now, one of the professors that helps make that possible today is Dr. Jason Appt, who we have the honor of learning from today. Now, Professor Appt is a transpersonal psychologist, psychotherapist, mindfulness instructor, and professor in Naropa's psychology program. Professor Appt has been in Naropa's community for 18 years, where prior to becoming faculty, he trained as a counselor. After teaching on campus for many years, he now teaches solely online. Today, Professor Appt presents Psychology of Renewal, contemplative education in times of rapid cultural change and unprecedented crisis. We'll focus on the needed education in times of rapid cultural change and unprecedented crisis. Things like, when is a return to prior normal not tenable? We'll explore the psychology of transformation, also known as the renewal or death-rebirth process, and how it may offer a conceptual framework and contemplative skills for hospicing or consciously assisting the necessary dying process of unsustainable social and individual ways of living. And today, before we end, we will have a small period of time at the end of the class for some questions. So to add a question, you will find the Q&A option in your Zoom options. It'll be down at that bar. So please send any inquiry to that section, and we will do our best to connect you with an answer. So again, that Q&A section is the best place to throw your questions in. So without further ado, Dr. Appt, thank you very much for your guidance today.
In the beginning, when you first arrive, it's ordinary to be nonverbal for some time. First 9 months of life, a kind of silent retreat. In the beginning of each day, when you wake up in the morning, it's ordinary to be nonverbal for some time. In the beginning of this Experience Naropa session, as we arrive and hopefully wake up together, let's let this nonverbal quality of beginnings breathe. So I'd like to formally introduce you to one of our co-teachers, co-facilitators for today. This is Silence. They are a master teacher, healer, non-human medicine person, elder, sage, priestess, priest, prophetess, prophet, shamanist, shaman, guru, rebbe, sheikh, a spirit worker. This is Silence. Meet Silence. You may notice one of the yogas of Silence is they turn the lights of awareness up. That one of Silence's medicines is she turns the dimmer switch of mindfulness or presence up. We won't have time to formally introduce all of our other co-teacher guides today, like stillness, space, and many others. The midwives, whose work it is to assist in bringing forth what is within you, the etymological root meaning of the word education. And we must now add, to bring forth what is between you and all of your relations. Notice what happens when you come into relationship with Silence to receive teachings. One spring morning in 1971, writes Naropa's co-founder and first CEO, John Baker, my teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, Naropa's founder, taught me how to teach meditation. We were outside my house that my wife and I shared with Rinpoche and his wife in 4 Mile Canyon in Boulder, Colorado. We sat facing each other across a picnic table in the bright April sunlight. What he told me had nothing to do with the technique of sitting meditation, which usually involves working with the breath as an object of meditation and dealing with the mental events that lead us away from the present moment. Rather, his instruction was about how to be an ordinary human being in relationship with other ordinary human beings. And we must now add, in relationship with non-human beings, the rest of the created and manifest world. Since the age of the individual is over or is actively dying, how can we turn our individual meditations into socialized meditation? As Naropa's former World Wisdom Chair, Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, Zichronam Levracha, may his memory be a blessing, used to call it socialized meditation. And as he also would say, the only way to get it together is together. Education is much larger than formal institutionalized schooling. what kind of education is needed now? Not just for individual competencies and competition, nor obsession with individuation, trying to find one's individual uniqueness, as important as that is. But education for the health of our communities, the thriving of cultures. The physical body grows on its own. Not so with the human heart. What education will help us truly grow up, to mature as individuals and communities, emotionally, relationally, mentally, ecologically, spiritually, to become as sophisticated in ways of the heart as we are in ways of war and STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics? How do we become what Naropa's founder called full human beings, who recognize that aggression is the source of our problems, not the solution? How can we heal the separation between who we really are and the social masks we're pressured to wear? Not the literal masks, the social masks, the personas, the theater, the performance, the traditional notion of a mask. How do we join what educator and friend of Naropa, Parker Palmer, calls our soul with our role? How do we not live a divided life with a personal, private, meaningful life and a more hidden, not real life on the outside, in public? So throughout your experience today, your Naropa experience, I see a good question. Is there any place for aggression? Let's come back to that. Thanks, Amanda. We can talk about that, right? The tensions and the paradoxes of these different kinds of energies, to not become too extreme or naive or make ourselves overly vulnerable as pacifists, etc. So let's come back to that. Throughout your Naropa experience today, there will be what is said, the content, and what is done, what you do in sessions. Though I invite you deeper to pay attention to the atmospheric qualities and feelings you have both during and after this experience today. Most communication is nonverbal, and for important decisions like whether to attend Naropa, it's wise to consult your direct experience. So welcome. That was by way of beginnings. Our title today, Psychology of Renewal, Contemplative Education in Times of Rapid Cultural Change and Unprecedented Crises, interconnected, compounded, complex crises. And so as Peter explained, we'll leave time after I share some teachings here to dialogue with each other through the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. But first, some teachings. Twins are growing in their mother's womb. Warm, safe, and protected. Everything is provided, all-inclusive, hotel, retreat, shelter, food, drink. It's what they know and love. One day, they feel themselves getting pushed, contracted, pressure, beginning to worry. What's happening? Will we have to leave, or are we going to die, or are we being evicted? Why? One of the twins also has a sense that they're coming into something mysteriously new. Form. The form they're in is changing, it's transforming. becoming a new form. The other twin feels only what they see and touch right now is trustworthy, not in anything that is not here right now. We only know this world, they say, and life here, this after here is nothing. We must fight, we must resist. One day, the pressures and convulsions increase even more, exponentially, and they begin pushing them lower and lower, now with directionality. Great pain and upheaval, water bursts forth. The one who sensed that there was something more leaves first and emerges into some new mysterious condition. And the remaining twin hears the one who went ahead crying and begins to bemoan their siblings' terrible fate. This is a Jewish parable. In Tibetan Buddhist psychology, Bardo teachings tell us, Bardo literally meaning something like to throw between, being thrown between, refers to any in-between, transitional, intermediate, liminal threshold or gap state between the completion of one situation and the onset of another, where you're no longer in your old reality, nor are you in a new stabilized one. You're in between two states. The concept of Bardo in Western contexts has often been simplified and thought of as referring solely to the space between physical, literal bodily death and reincarnation or rebirth. Yet Bardos are said to actually be occurring all the time in life while we're alive. Naropa's founder described them as, quote, present experience, the immediate experience of nowness, and that when we have emerged from the past and we have not yet formulated the future, but strangely enough, we happen to be somewhere. We're standing on some ground, which is very mysterious. And he says this mysterious ground, quote, belongs to neither that nor this. And it is very closely associated with the practice of meditation. In fact, it is the meditation experience, he says. So Bardos are characterized by this great uncertainty, and they can be sources of fear and panic and paranoia, and also great liberatory creativity. In such situations of concentrated or intensified transition, the truth of impermanence is less concealed and more revealed. Thus, Bardo, Sogyo Rinpoche tells us, are, quote, particularly powerful opportunities for liberation, or moments that are much more powerful than others and much more charged with potential when whatever you do has a crucial and far-reaching effect. So we have these characteristics of these Bardo states: uncertainty, not knowing, groundlessness, instability, unpredictability, confusion, fear, anxiety, panic, paranoia, loss of structure and familiarity, loss or lack of control, disintegration, things are falling apart, there's no solidity, and an interruption, a disruption of long-held conveniences and comforts. And the binary mind, the one that thinks in terms of black and white, wants to know whether Bardos are good or bad. Yet like many things, like fire, like psychoactive substances, like sexuality, like many things, it depends how we use them. It depends how we relate to them. They can be used for wonderful, creative, awakening purposes and also destructive purposes. So Bardos are multivalent. Their value, whether they're positive or negative, depends on how we work with them, on our relationship to them. We can react more with anxiety, fear, panic, paranoia, resistance, anger, rage, doubt, hopelessness, and also with creativity, choice, responsibility, becoming more open to new perspectives and meanings. So more specifically, Tibetan psychology teaches that there are 4 or 6 Bardos. The first Bardo is the ordinary waking state of consciousness, when we're not intoxicated, which itself is a relative condition. Have you drinking coffee? Have you not? Etc. But the ordinary waking state of consciousness in life, it also includes some of the sort of sub-bardos included in life are when we're asleep, in the sleep state, the non-dream sleep state, also the dream sleep state, and meditative or altered states of consciousness. So these are all states that we can be in when we're actually in life, we're alive. And so this first Bardo, or if we include these other ones in it, these are all, they begin with birth of a human body, and they go all the way until when causes and conditions in our life mark the onset of the dying process, when that dying process actively commences. The second Bardo is the Bardo of death and dying. The process begins when the causes and conditions of dying commence. It's right sometime when it's clear that a person, we could say this person now is dying. And this second Bardo includes that dying process and the actual moment of death itself, the crossing of that threshold. So just to right after the moment of death. And then starts the third Bardo. The Bardo is the after-death experience, where it's said that our true nature is said to be revealed in all of its nakedness. And finally, the fourth Bardo is the process of becoming something new, and it ends the moment before new birth. So since the Bardos seem to cover a full range of possible human experience, you might be asking, what isn't Bardo? So on a deeper level, it's said that the only thing that isn't Bardo is your true deathless nature. Trungpa described that Bardo as also being connected with the experience of ego. Sometimes they're described as here and now experience, but also paradoxically, the experience of ego and all sorts of journeys through different kinds of realms that we can go in. So in this light, Dyongsar Jamyang Khyentse Rinpoche called them trips, being on a trip. Between 2 points, or the time we do not recognize our true nature, all the way until we wake up and remember our true nature. Okay, so now I'd like to shift and show you one more little teaching model, and then we'll open it up together. So can I just see a thumbs if you're seeing this shared screen now? Okay. So this is from Transpersonal Psychology. Stanislav Grof, a Czech psychiatrist from the Czech Republic, has developed a model to help us understand this process of change, of Bardo, transition, of transformation or renewal or death and rebirth. And he's a physician. He modeled it off of the actual stages of biological delivery. And he created a 4-part pattern, which he calls the basic perinatal matrices, or the perinatal unconscious. Perinatal being that which is near, in and around birth. Peri, near, next to birth. So on a biological level, if you see these stages, the BPM1 represents the advanced stage of prenatal life, just before the onset of delivery. Okay? BPM2, the onset of delivery, with periodic uterine contractions and a closed cervix. So there's still no opening, but there starts the contractions. BPM3, continued contractions, but now there's a dilated cervix. There begins to be an opening, and there starts to be a sense of directionality or movement or propulsion into the birth canal. And finally, BPM4 is the emergence into the world as an anatomically separate individual, separate from before being one organism. Now, that's on a biological level. This model is used for us to try to help understand how to navigate through our own psychological experiences, or psychospiritual. So on that level, on the psychospiritual, BPM1 represents this intrauterine symbiotic state of union or undifferentiated identification with the maternal organism. And in an undisturbed or positive intrauterine environment or a good womb situation, the experience is one of protection, security, safety, cosmic unity, connection with everything, satisfaction of all needs. But in a disturbed or negative intrauterine environment, could be from substances or being pregnant during war, etc. context, there can be a bad womb situation where there can be feelings of paranoid threats of attack, pollution, toxicity. Okay, that's BPM 1. BPM 2 is the original separation. The process that begins this differentiation, this loss of a primary mother-child attachment, can have accompanied feelings of rejection, being expulsion, abandonment, anger, confusion, ambivalence, despair, helplessness, hopelessness, as we heard from the twins example. And with the cervix still closed, this pressure from the contractions and oxygen flow being periodically cut off with the contractions, this lack of directional movement toward release or escape, because there's no opening yet or directionality, thus no awareness of relief. BPM 2 represents this state of engulfment or a no exit situation or a feeling of hell. So if you might already be, if we're going to plot where we are right now as a, in many ways, world community, we might start seeing how we're in BPM 2 and 3. So BPM 3 is the life and death struggle or resistance against complete annihilation of one's identity of oneness with the mother, what we know to be who we are. That's being threatened. With the cervix open now, however, begins movement into the canal and thus hope for possible escape, whereas before hopelessness. BPM 3, unlike BPM 2, then starts to involve aggression, violence, struggle, and fighting. Tremendous pent-up energies from BPM 2 experience partial discharge in BPM 3, yet remain blocked from full liberation. So moods alternate between excitatory and inhibitory states with experiences of partial release, anticipation of full release, and a remaining sense of feeling stuck. And finally, BPM 4 is the psychological death experience itself, not just the struggle. I want to try to stay alive of what I know and prevent this death, but the actual experience of having to do it. The death experience, the loss of identity, the loss of previous identifications, followed by a rebirth experience as an anatomically separate being. So BPM 4 is where death and birth actually occur, but the heart of this whole entire perinatal sequence, this whole model, all four, is the experience of psychospiritual dying, death, and birth. Or in short, we can think of it instead of a four-part matrix, it's really in a deeper sense two: death and rebirth. Okay, so I'm going to stop there and open it up so we can interact some for the remainder of our time, and we have 15 minutes, which is nice. So please, comments, it does not have to be just questions, but comments, questions about anything that has just come up at all during any of this, of what I've been sharing. Comments, questions, clarifications. Disagreements are welcome. Arguments. Maybe how could this potentially be relevant? Is it resonating? Is it not resonating? Okay, I'm seeing from Nadia, how do you access creativity instead of aggression during these times? Okay, also, let me just say something. I think, Amanda, I saw that you previously wrote question answered already. So I'm going to tell me if that's not correct, but I'm assuming that maybe what I said or it's something else responded to your original question about is there a role for aggression. So Nadja, how do you access creativity instead of aggression during these times? Nadja, do you mind saying even your own first sense of that? Sometimes the question and the questioner is, I would say, pregnant with a deep insight. Otherwise, the question wouldn't come. Would you be willing to even just give even a short reply, and I'll read it, of what you think? How to access creativity instead of aggression. Or someone else. Someone else could also say what you think of that. Notice I'm trying to decenter my role as the one who knows. This is part of what I call participatory education. It's not just me who knows some answer. And holding the question is sometimes just as or more important than jumping to an idea that someone in a position of power or a position of a social hierarchy has to say. I'm not sure I have an answer, ha ha. Okay, that's okay. Just a moment. Oh, I see what's happening is I'm seeing things in the chat and in the Q&A, so that's okay. I'll look at both. Okay, so Amanda, you said it's how we use aggression. That's how there can be a place for aggression. Okay. Thank you for mentioning Reb Zalman. I'm still holding your question, Nadja, just a minute. I want to collect some more of what's here. Thank you for mentioning Reb Zalman. I honestly had forgotten about his involvement with Naropa. Ruben. Matthew, thank you for incorporating the way of the psychonaut. Amanda, to me, creativity and aggression are not two, like the yin and the yang. Okay. Nice. So Nadja, that starts to make it more complex even. How do we start to think about those as not being separate or binary in some way? But perhaps somehow related. So something that Trungpa also taught from Tibetan psychology is this notion of drala, the principle of drala, which he defined as the energy beyond aggression. There's ways we can learn how to cultivate and invoke drala, and it's energy beyond aggression, or another way he put it is energy beyond duality. That duality, whenever we're caught in a duality of this versus that, or a polarized energy, which is very much happening in our current context in our world, is much, much polarization, because this happens during times of cultural change, rapid cultural change and crises, as people become polarized politically. Many relationships have been injured badly, family relationships during this time. So he talked about non-aggression in this drala principle as energy beyond duality, some way that we can go beyond the fighting of the polarized energies, which speaks, I think, to what you're saying, Amanda, that creativity and aggression are not two. Ruben, I think it's important to connect with joy, pleasure when feeling the emotionally alienated effects of violence and aggression. Very much. Some of my teachers have been helping guide me in this, in terms of how, especially in these times, actually the role of joy is extremely important, even though it can feel that being in states of joy can make us feel guilty, or that we're ignoring the suffering, but actually joy is extremely healing and important to help facilitate the kind of processes that many of us feel need to be happening. And all the while, in the midst of the greatest suffering, it's still our life. This is still our life. So thank you, Ruben. Misha, I apologize for, obviously I'm not meeting you to hear your name pronounced by you. I really felt a lot of resonance with the soul, with roll, with like soul and roll, I think what I was saying, Parker Palmer, and that whole intro bit. I just want to replay to digest. I really felt my creativity and reimagining and my path and purpose being stoked. Okay, good. So maybe partly if that helped your creativity feel stimulated, then we could say the role of silence could be a way to help go beyond aggression, to get to creativity. Isaiah, I think, said, as a mother, I wish the drawings of birth were in the opposite direction. Babies aren't usually born up. Somehow that bothered me. Thank you. There are some, if we had time and we were actually in a class, I would show you there's some beautiful artworks that have also been made around this transpersonal model. Many different people have drawn the matrices in very different ways. Thanks for saying that. It's also, there's a linearity to this. I actually like it when it's in a circle more. Okay. Julie, perhaps we can access creativity over aggression by asking our deepest selves which energy we want to live with. If we access creativity, we embrace an energy that truly feels like a release, while aggression does not feel like a release, but rather a perpetuation of this energy. Wow. So that really reminds me, Julie, of the notion of catharsis, that sometimes there's a feeling that in psychology, a lot of the ways we understand of why we like to act out with our words or with our bodies or with passive aggressiveness in relationships is because we just can't hold the uncomfortable, strong power of emotion. And so we want to just say that thing and do that thing and then, or send that email, and because we feel we want to get that energy out. But I think, Julia, if I'm hearing you right, and we don't have the ability in the webinar to clarify and hear from you, but that this would, at least what makes me think of what you're bringing and sharing, is that actually it doesn't ultimately work just taking energy out on people. It actually doesn't really release the energy. It actually builds it up and develops more seeds for having future issues with that energy. Whereas you're saying that creativity actually can really move that energy, I think, in a more sustainable way. Okay, Samantha, we can use the energy from aggression and channel it into creativity. My main medium for this is ceramics due to the physicality of it. Oh, okay, beautiful. So one aspect here is like having a physical practice or something we do in the world which is physical, which you can help channel energy through. And there's a lot talked about also in Buddhist psychology of transmuting emotions or the energy of emotions, so that we don't want to get rid of any of the emotions we usually call negative, like anger. We actually very much need that energy, that raw energy. Trungpa talked about it as emotion as energy plus story that is like putting colors in raw water, and it starts to story it or color it. But the raw energy we can really, really use to harness for purposes that we find valuable. Let's see where we're at. Okay, good. So we have like 6 minutes left. I've got a pulse from Peter that this is, okay, I'm gonna keep going with these, and then I'm gonna also look over at the Q&A because I know I haven't gone there. To Irina, to connect to this energy which is beyond duality is connecting and merging with space, question mark. I like the question. Yeah. Is that connecting with space? Like, what if I'm feeling really charged in my body and the only thing I'm aware of is my body, so then I feel like I have to say that thing? But what if I'm aware of all the space in front of me and behind me, what we call mudra space awareness at Naropa? the space on my sides in all the directions. Then could I maybe feel, wait, oh, it's not only this claustrophobic emotional reactivity that I have to act on. There's more happening here. So thanks. Evie, if anyone's interested in rewatching this class, there's a note here how to do that. Julie, yes, that is exactly what I mean, Julie said. Okay, good. Kelly, the state of being alive is such a wondrous and special thing. The totality of feeling is a vastly glorious part about being human. Harnessing that feeling, leaning into it, and then birthing it into the world through creative means, whether aggression or joy is felt, restoration of our whole selves is possible. Matthew, I feel anger is passion for truth. Yeah, beautiful. Yes, there's teachings about this, exactly, like how that transmutation process is turning poisons into antidotes or medicines. And one way is that the anger has this quality of passionateness. And it also, there's a whole practice in Naropa called Maitri families, and there's actual colored rooms with certain particular designs and shapes of the room, similar to how my room has some funky configuration. And then you get into certain postures and you practice meditating in there. And it helps heighten or invoke certain states. They actually originally were originally thought of as to try to use as a therapeutic tool, but they realized that it was actually making people go into extreme states. It was heightening state. It was acting like a catalyst, like psychedelics, like a non-drug catalyst for certain states of mind. And so they then stopped using it for therapeutic means and were using it again as a training tool for therapists. And in that context, anger is taught, and there are many other qualities. That anger also has the quality of clarity. Like, when you get very angry, sometimes if you don't go over too much and react, you can get really sharp. Your mind can get very sharp. Yeah. So there are qualities to all the emotions in this way. Okay, and let's see. Janine, I can relate to this transference of aggression into creativity. For me, this is when I'm in my garden. Beautiful. Okay, back to the Q&A, and then we'll bring this to a close. Naveed, I'm curious about how we hold each other during groundless, interruptive Bardo states, or as Bayo Akomlefe says, I think I might know who you mean, but I'm sorry, I'm not pronouncing their name right. How can we fall more beautifully together? How can we fall more beautifully together? And finally, Stephen, could you elaborate on the duality you mentioned? Okay, let me try maybe in a minute. And finally now, Amanda, new question. I'm exploring interesting a degree in early childhood or elementary education. The Bardo states are not as evident to them, but they are to those of us attempting to create space for their development. Yes, how does Naropa teach all these deep ways that are effective for young people? Yeah, so I think, hopefully I'm hearing you right, is that, for example, when I was training as a psychotherapist at Naropa, one of the things we talked about is, do you teach your clients that you're working with as therapy clients meditation? And pretty much the view is no. I mean, if they're interested in meditation, you can refer them to meditation class or context or instructor, but that rather that you have your own practice of meditation, that you embody what comes out of you having your own practice. You study yourself. You study in your life and practice. And then when you come to work with your clients, as I said, most communication is nonverbal. So instead of trying to explain to clients about meditation or explain to clients about Bardos or in your case, explain to children about Bardos, which is a high-level concept. You embody what it means to be open to those processes that we're looking at, the BPMs, and the fertility and creativity, the liberatory possibilities with Bardos. And then also, of course, Amanda, is you could, like through children's books or other ways, you can convert or translate like high theory concepts for adult into ways that children will understand. Like, do you know what it's like when your parents got divorced and how you felt you didn't know what it was like, and now one of them wasn't home and the other, you're not in your old reality and you're not in your new one yet? Those kind of things, ways that children can relate. So Stephen, because we're at time, I'm not going to be able to elaborate more on that duality right now, but so I apologize. But I want to come right to a close with all of this and thank you for everyone's participation, and ask you just for this last under a minute to beginning and endings are related. There's a teaching in my tradition, the Jewish tradition, that says the end is in the beginning and the beginning is in the end. So in the end, when you're leaving, just like in the beginning, it's ordinary to be nonverbal for some time. In the end of your day, when you go to sleep at night, it's ordinary to be nonverbal for some time. Beginning and endings tend to mirror each other. Feelings you had at the beginning of a relationship and then the ones you have when you break up. Flashbacks come at the end of life. In the end of this experience Naropa session, as we exit and hopefully wake up together, let's let this nonverbal quality of ending breathe. So if you would like, let's bow. Thank you so much. I hope to maybe see some of you in the future. Have a really, really meaningful rest of the day.
Thank you very much, Professor. Many thought-provoking topics there. Beginning of life as a form of silent retreat, and those other co-teachers, aggression, social masks,